Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming. If Twitter is your jam, that's my Twitter up there. But otherwise, let's try this. Aha. Well, my name is Joshua Ginsberg, but everybody calls me Jag. I came into the Red Hat world as the chief architect for Ansible engineering, guiding the high-level technical architecture of products in the Ansible family. And this year, I made a transition to a role steering portfolio-level architecture for the entire Red Hat management product family. I also serve on Red Hat's Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Board. So that's me. But this is Melvin. Melvin Conway. In 1967, he published a paper entitled "How Do Committees Invent?" Its conclusion has been coined as Conways Law. And that conclusion read, "The basic thesis of this article is that organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structures of these organizations. We have seen that this fact has important implications for the management of system design. Primarily, we have found a criterion for the structuring of design organizations. Design effort should be organized according to the need for communication. This criterion creates a problem because the need to communicate at any time depends on the system concept in effect at that time. Because the design which occurs first is almost never the best possible, the prevailing system concept may need to change. Therefore, flexibility of organization is important to effective design." That's a mouthful. But what I take away from that is that Conway's Law points to a feedback loop. Communication structure impacts design, and system design also impacts communication structure. When it comes to code and culture, one hand washes the other. I didn't really fully understand this until I came to work at Ansible. So Ansible is the darling of DevOps. DevOps is the realization that until we had a collaborative relationship between the folks who built software and the folks who operated software, we'd be stuck fighting fires, playing catch up, burning out. We'd be delivering late, under quality, and over budget. And the easiest way to start trying to fix that is with tooling and process. And that's really what Ansible brought to the table. Through Ansible's mantra of simple, of powerful, and of agentless, it has become the de facto language of IT automation. It isn't just a way to write scripts, it's the way to tell the story of how an organization gets things done. And what I discovered after joining Ansible and talking to so many customers was that the difference between an organization that got the richest transformation from the addition of Ansible versus an organization which might have gotten a more meager transformation was their culture. So for true digital transformation, the right tooling isn't enough. Conway's Law suggests that digital transformation is as much a cultural endeavor as it is a technological one. Tools inform culture. Culture informs tools. I mean, you can install and run amazing tooling all day long. But if your culture doesn't support communication, trust, and collaboration, the kind necessary to take advantage of that tooling, it's all for naught. You really need to have both. And the bad news is that tooling is easy. Culture is hard. Now, we're here at Red Hat Summit, and absolutely my colleagues in sales and solution would be happy to sell you every single product that your budget allows. Every single vendor here would. But what I think is so amazingly unique about Red Hat in particular is that our tools are just vehicles by which we can deliver to you our culture. And it's been neat working for Ansible and seeing how our culture got baked into the tool that we created. Ansible unlocked transformative capabilities for the companies whose culture was compatible with our own. And what I've found as I've started to build these relationships with teams outside of the Ansible organization is that each one of them does the same thing. The tools and the platforms that they build are baked with the qualities of the team that built them, which is cool because as Red Hat CEO Jim Whitehurst likes to say, Red Hat's culture is the source of our persistent competitive advantage in the marketplace. Now, I keep throwing out this word culture, but it deserves some focus. Culture, like DevOps, is one of those words that's sort of hard to define. You could ask 100 different people and you'd probably get 100 different definitions. So here's mine. The simplest definition of culture in your company is the set of behaviors that get you ahead in the company. If your company applauds it, if it earns you esteem from your colleagues, if it launches you ahead in your career versus setting you back, it is part of your culture. What you reward, you get more of. And so this definition suggests that managers and team leads have a unique charge within an organization. The role of management is to offer culture as a service. Since it's you who decides who gets promoted, since it's you who decides who gets the new professional opportunities and the cool assignments, since it's you who decides who advances in their careers, you ultimately define your company's culture for everybody else through these decisions. The values you emphasize are the values your team will reflect. But let's remember Conway. The culture you create and the systems you create are inextricably linked. So let's talk microservices. Let's talk service-oriented architecture. What kind of culture do we need to create to best support products with these designs? So containerized infrastructure, it represents a wholly new paradigm of IT artifact organization and delivery. But if you look at it, it's part of a straight line trajectory from bare metal through hardware virtualization and now to containers. And what's cool to me is this trajectory gives us an idea of where we can start looking in terms of the culture that we seek. So as an example, let's take a look at how human resource models might map to IT concepts. So back when I started in IT, hardware virtualization did not exist, well, at least for x86 servers. And everything was bare metal. So when you wanted to get a new server, purchasing hardware was an expensive, upfront budget item. Had to be justified with a multi-year business need. The investment to set it up and to maintain it, it was substantial. And every single rig you bought, was a little bit different and required a little different handling, which in a business sense is basically what a full-time employee is. Budget and multi-year commitment have to be justified. Selection, it takes time. New hires are slow to onboard and get up to speed, and every single one requires a unique touch to manage and integrate into the organizational whole. So when the Zen hypervisor was first introduced to Linux in 2003, it began a revolution around hardware virtualization. Suddenly the process to provision a machine went from weeks to maybe hours. The budgetary and operational commitments to a virtual machine are an order of magnitude less than any bare metal, and server resources can be spun up and spun down with the seasonal ebbs and flows of service demand, which in a business sense is not unlike a contractor. A budgetary commitment only lasts through the length of a contract. You don't have any persistent investment either from the contractor or from the company. Capacity can grow and fall with demand. So in this arc, there's this Conway-esque set of parallels between IT paradigms and how companies structure their relationship with their staff. So enter Kubernetes, enter containerized microservices. How then should companies structure their relationships with their employees? What cultural values should a company reflect to best support this paradigm? So when I look at an enterprise Kubernetes like OpenShift, the culture that I see built into that product is all around boundary and expectation setting. So in my life, I've learned that the foundation of any healthy relationship, and that could be a personal relationship or a professional relationship, but it's solid boundary and expectation setting. So what does that mean? Solid boundaries means establishing the limits of behavior that aren't to be crossed. Within those lines, go to town. You have full freedom to do anything you wish, as long as you don't cross those lines. And clear expectations mean you make clear what you will or will not do, and that you deliver on what it is that you say, else you reset those expectations. And that you make clear what you expect from somebody else to deliver to you as well. And every good relationship is based on these fundamentals. Which to me sounds an awful lot like, in Kubernetes, pods and services. I mean, a pod defines a sandbox within which the developer has full domain. Beyond the pod, all bets are off. But within it, you have full freedom to do whatever you want. And the services, they define these expectations that a pod promises to deliver. It's a sort of contract that the developers of that pod agree to fulfill. And in that model, if you are the manager or you are the tech lead, you are the control plane. You are the one setting those boundaries and expectations. You're setting limits and priorities. You're allocating resources. You, like Kubernetes, make this ecosystem possible because you provide this culture as a service. So as a manager or tech lead, set solid boundaries for your team. Let them know what elements of deliverables are non-negotiable requirements, but then at the same time support their free and unfettered autonomy within the boundaries that you've set. And demonstrate the power of clear expectations both in what you offer and in what you demand. Make clear what your team can expect from you and deliver on the expectations you set. And conversely, demand that your team set your expectations both clearly and realistically. Make it clear that meeting expectations is a positive cultural value on your team. So while pods may have these rigid boundaries and service definitions outwardly, within a pod, everything is open, it's unlocked, it's vulnerable. Similarly, high-functioning teams are ones that are open and vulnerable to each other. So as a team lead or as a manager, the example for that vulnerability, again, starts with you. So especially in computing, we have a very negative reaction to this word, vulnerability. I mean, it makes sense in terms of software and systems security. Vulnerabilities are categorically bad. They're problems that have to be fixed as quickly as possible. But within a team and within your personal relationships with your teammates, vulnerability is not a weakness that needs to be contained. Quite the opposite. Vulnerability demonstrates tremendous strength. It shows trust. It shows confidence in yourself. It shows a sort of humility that humanizes you in the eyes of your team. Every single member of your team is a human being. They have opportunities to grow. They have shame and guilt that they carry with them. They have passion and ambition that they burn with. And they're an entire universe into themselves. Demonstrating that you trust them through your own personal vulnerability, I guarantee you'll see that vulnerability and trust returned in kind. And once you have that trust established, you can grow as a team, both as human beings, but also in your work as engineers. Because there's an unspoken trade-off that we make in service-oriented architecture of microservices. We intentionally let go of control in order to allow for ownership, for accountability, and for innovation. We have to start by accepting that we can't control everything. But in order to have ownership, we need solid boundaries in order to make clear what results can be owned. In order to have accountability, we have to have clear expectations. Otherwise, what would they be accountable for? And we have to have trust and vulnerability for true innovation. Because unless you feel that sense of psychological safety, tactical risks simply won't be taken for fear of failure or shame. And just like among microservices, clear communication underlies every single one of these cultural values. So by and large, we humans, we speak to each other without a lot of intentional thought, which makes sense. We've been speaking to each other since we were in diapers. But we can do so without a conscious intention, and that's what we actually do. But simply speaking or writing an email or sending a Slack message, that's different than communicating. When we're sharing words with one another mindlessly, the outcome of sharing those words is fraught with uncertainty. It's only when we have mindful intention around the words that we use that we really end up effectively communicating with each other. It's a subtle difference, but it's a critical one. And incidentally, this is part of why in my career I've always preferred working on teams that are highly diverse across a number of dimensions. From a purely practical standpoint, I've experienced that diverse teams will more naturally incline themselves toward intentional communication because they consider more mindfully how the words that they use are going to be received, and as a result, the communication is ultimately more effective. That's my experience, but you can take from that what you will. Anyway, this is Tim. Tim's my boss. He's the Senior Director of Engineering for the Red Hat Management, and he's awesome. But Tim says that 99% of delivery mistakes are the result of ineffective communication, and he's absolutely right. Because our services and our programs, the software we build, they all have defined interfaces. They publish how they will or how they won't work. They document how they will or they won't respond to certain requests. But we as humans, our interfaces are not so concretely defined, and we don't predictably respond to malform requests. So it's necessary for effective communication to be more intentional about how we interface. So as an example, here's a framework that you can consider using to make your email communication more intentional and therefore more effective. It identifies 6 different linguistic moves. So before crafting any email, decide beforehand which linguistic move or moves you want to make in the email. Then before you hit send, go back, reread, and make sure that you honored your intention. So here are the 6. So 1 is a request. Will you do something for me? 2nd is an offer. I would like to do something for you. And the 3rd is a promise, a commitment of somebody to deliver some set of circumstances in the future. Now, with these first 3, note that all of them require an acceptance, that the other party has to agree to it before there's any expectation of action. But the next 3 are all about, they're all creative. They're all about creating facts that didn't exist before. So the first is declaration, and that's creating a fact. Often declarations are what we really need from leadership because leadership has the authority to make those declarations. A lot of times in communication within a company, the confusion boils down to nobody knowing who has the authority to make those declarations. Number 5 is an assertion. It's just like in programming, it's an assertion of something which has happened before, is already true, but it's reincorporating it back into the present moment. And the last one is an assessment, and that's stating your opinion. There's a critical difference and often confusion between an assessment and a declaration. Remember that an assessment is stating your opinion, but a declaration is making a new fact true. So if you're a team lead or a manager, give this a try. Before you write any email, any Slack message, identify in your head what move you want to make through that communication. Go back and read it again and make sure you did so. Now, it might feel weird or artificial at first. I mean, it's certainly not the way that we ordinarily speak to one another. But you can pay attention to how effective this style of communication can be because you'll notice you spend less time clarifying what you've previously said. You'll find that your team members deliver more closely to your expectations. You'll probably find that there's more clarity and less confusion, that there's more alignment among your team's actions. Give it a try, and I bet you will see that. So you might look at this and think, duh, I should set clear expectations? Thanks, Jag. But just like in coding, explicit is better than implicit. Intentional is better than autopilot. But I mean, think back to managers you've had or teams that you've been on where you didn't have clear boundaries or expectations set. Think about times in your career where you haven't felt psychologically safe to take risks in your organization. Think about when you wrote an email to somebody that they interpreted completely differently from the way that you intended. Now, all these conditions happen, but they rarely happen because somebody was malicious. They happen because somebody was mindless about their words or their actions. So being explicit about the structure of your communication and setting intentions, that creates the conditions in which we can bend and change the reality around us. So if you have no other takeaway from my talk today, I really hope it's a resolution to be more intentional about your words and your decisions, to be more mindful of the culture that your words and decisions create in the team around you. Now, we got to be realistic though. Even if you are perfectly intentional with your communication, even if you set solid boundaries and clear expectations, even if you cultivate vulnerability and trust in your team, something's going to go wrong. A misunderstanding will happen, somebody's feelings will get hurt, conflict is just going to arise. And how we handle it makes all the difference in the world. So the best advice that I have for handling such conflict, I got from a book called The 4 Agreements. It's written by a Mexican author who's a shaman of the Toltec tradition. But as expected from the title, it outlines 4 truths that you need to agree to in order to navigate such interpersonal conflict. So the first one is to be impeccable with your word. The word impeccable derives from the Latin. It means without sin. In short, the agreement is to, it's a charge to you to use your words intentionally for precisely what you mean, without malice, passive aggression, or callousness. Your words have tremendous power to influence others' moods and perceptions, their very daily reality. We really need to use our words the same way we might use a weapon, always with the utmost care. And the second is to take nothing personally. This one's hard. I still struggle with this one. It requires you to accept that another person's words are reflective of their reality, of their truths, and of their needs. It's not about you. It's never about you. It's only about their view of the truth. And if you can remember that, it's easier to let other people's words go, even if they are not impeccable with them. The third one is to make no assumptions. If you don't understand with certainty, ask a question, seek clarification. And we all know that every time you make an assumption, you make an ass out of you and umption. And finally, the 4th agreement is to always do your best, fully recognizing that you are a human and your best will not be perfect, fully recognizing that your best will vary on any given day, depending on your own circumstances. It's a reminder that we, even as leaders in tech, we're still human. We're still susceptible to shortcomings, oversights, and missteps. And it's a reminder to be as gentle with ourselves as we would want other people to be with us. So, to recap, your company culture is derived entirely from the behaviors that you reward inside of it. You as a leader or as a manager, you define those behaviors. You define your culture. So I highly recommend you do set solid boundaries and clear expectations with your team. I recommend you be vulnerable with your team, to be human with your team, in order to cultivate trust and honesty, to encourage ownership over results, accountability for those decisions, and innovation. Let go of the need to control everything. And communicate intentionally with your team to communicate more effectively with your team. And since nothing will go exactly according to plan, in case of fail, speak impeccably, assume good faith, let go of personal slight, and always do your best. So we got through that a little early, but thank you guys for attending. Thank you to my colleagues at Red Hat and Ansible for teaching me so much along this way. Thank you to my boss, Tim, for being an awesome boss. And thank you guys for coming.